Dragon Engines by Cinda Gallagher. Mara Vex slipped through the press of bodies, her boots slick on the copper-plated floor of the piston arena. Every face in the crowd was turned upward, eyes glued to the ironclad beasts screaming through the char-black sky. "Third round," boomed the announcer's amplified voice. "The Steel Reaver leads by 4 lengths." A roar erupted, and Mara allowed herself a smirk. The Reaver's victory meant her boss, no, her keeper, was another step closer to his prize, a 6-foot dragon spine engine capable of powering a fleet. She knew because she was the one who'd smuggled its schematics through a nest of razorbeak sentries and lost her left glove to a hungry gear grinder in the process. "Move it," hissed a voice. A sharp elbow jabbed her ribs. Mara turned to face an old rival, Crick's Folly, face scarred by slag burns, teeth yellow as sulfur. "Still breathing, I see," Mara drawled. She scanned the crowd behind him, careful not to show how quickly her pulse beat. Too many eyes, too many uniformed enforcers with their clinking belts of piston bolt cuffs. It was easy to vanish when no one knew your name. Much harder when your face was plastered on wanted posters from the slag docks to the Sky Forge. "What's in that smirk, Vex?" Crick said, narrowing his eyes. "Don't tell me you've placed a bet." Mara tilted her head. "What do you care, Folly? You never could stomach my luck." Luck. The lie tasted bitter. Luck didn't get you far in New Lorien. Steady hands and sharper wits, maybe? A knack for slipping past locks and watching unseen from shadowed corners. Mara had all of those in spades, but that didn't keep the bruises off her ribs or the ink off her ledger. The crowd roared again, and above them, a mechanical screech split the air. Mara's gaze snapped upward. 6 dragons soared above the arena, wings of brass and steel carving crescents through the ash-choked sky. The smallest, a burnished crimson beauty with coiled exhaust lines, veered toward the edge of the ring. Mara winced. The pilot was leaning too far into the wind, losing momentum. "That's the grinder wraith dropping behind again," the announcer crowed. "What's it gonna be, ladies and gents? Scrap heap or glory?" Crick sparked a laugh. "Bastard won't last a lap." "Maybe," Mara said, though she wasn't watching the grinder wraith anymore. She'd turned her attention to the glass observation box, where New Lorien's great barons sat draped in silk and arrogance. And at the center of them, her mark, the Coal King himself, Fabian Hark. Her fingers itched. Inside his coat pocket, Hark kept the key to his private hangar. The same hangar rumored to house the dragons he didn't dare race, prototypes, lightning fast, bound to their pilots by something close to magic. The air thrummed, and a dragon dipped low, steam hissing from its flanks. Time to move. Mara Vex tightened the straps on her gloves and slipped into the crowd. Tonight, the races would belong to her. Mara wove through the masses, quick as smoke and twice as intangible. The roar of the crowd was a beast unto itself, all stomping feet and howling voices. But she didn't flinch. Noise was the thief's greatest ally. After all, it hid intentions as easily as it swallowed lies. Her eyes locked on Fabian Hark. He lounged like a wolf among pigeons, sprawled in a high-backed chair lined with velvet, his brass-ringed fingers drumming against his knee. Beside him, a pair of enforcers stood as still as ironworks, each one twice as broad as Mara, and far less forgiving. She'd learned that the hard way 2 years back. The first time, he hadn't caught her. The second, she'd been close enough to feel the heat of his dragons breathing down her neck as she fled. This time, there'd be no mistakes. She slid toward the edge of the stands, where the shadows pooled like spilled ink beneath the steel scaffolding. From here, the arena was a furnace. Dragons wheeled through the air, their engines shrieking as they spat steam and embers. Gears ground and pistons hissed as riders leaned into tight, murderous turns, hands buried in the throttle grips of their mechanical beasts. The grinder wraith, the little crimson dragon, lagged far behind now. wings straining against the sky. From this distance, Mara could see the pilot, a thin man with jittery hands, too nervous to win, too desperate to quit. She grunted. "Poor bastard," she muttered to herself. But pity had no place here, not when she had a job to do. Her gaze flicked up. Hark was laughing now, baring his brass teeth at some joke the Barons were too spineless to question. It was an ugly sound, heavy, metallic, like a coin dropped into an empty tin. Mara's lip curled. She moved, darting under the scaffolding and into the dark labyrinth of pipes and gears that kept the arena breathing. Down here, the heat doubled, sweat prickling at her hairline as steam hissed through rusted valves. Cogs the size of her body churned above her head, a living wall of machinery grinding and grinding with merciless precision. "You've got this, Vex," she whispered. The key was simple enough. Get to the observation box, snatch it from Hark's coat, and disappear before anyone was the wiser. Simple never meant easy. Mara pulled herself onto a narrow beam that stretched across the scaffolding's underbelly. The iron groaned under her weight, but she didn't slow. She crouched low, toes balancing on the edge, muscles tight as the coils on a dragon's back. Above her, the crowd roared. Another pass. Another dragon closing the gap. She smiled faintly. Good. Let them watch the skies. Let them shout themselves hoarse as fire kissed the air and engines screamed like lost souls. She inched toward the edge of the beam, the observation box now just above her. Hark's laugh rolled over the stands again. "Keep laughing, you bastard," Mara muttered, unhooking the coil of wire from her belt. She moved fast. A toss, a hook, and the wire caught on the lower railing of the box. Mara pulled it taut, testing the tension with one sharp tug. Then she was moving, swinging upward, silent as a whisper, until her boots caught the edge of the railing. She crouched low, her heart drumming in her ears as she scanned the box. The Barons were too busy gawking at the races to notice her, and the enforcers, fools that they were, stood with their backs turned. Only Hark sat facing her direction, though his gaze was locked on the steel reaver soaring toward victory. Perfect. Mara dropped soundlessly onto the floorboards, a shadow among shadows. Hark's coat, black and lined with gold, was draped across the back of his chair, and in the left pocket, barely visible in the dim light, the telltale shape of a key. She reached out, fingers steady. The floor shook, and the crowd roared louder than ever. Mara froze. She glanced up, her pulse spiking. Above the arena, the grinder wraith, the smallest, the weakest, had shot forward like a flame-kissed arrow. Smoke trailed from its engines, but its wings caught the wind with unholy speed, slicing past the other dragons as if they were standing still. The crowd was screaming. Hark shot to his feet. "What in the hell?" Mara didn't hesitate. Her fingers closed around the key, and she slipped it free just as Hark turned, his gaze snapping toward her. For half a heartbeat, their eyes met. Mara smiled. Then she bolted. Mara didn't wait for the shout. She knew it was coming, knew the second Fabian Hark registered her face, the cry would echo like a gunshot through the arena. "Thief!" She vaulted over the railing. The wind caught her as she fell, roaring in her ears like a dragon's breath. Her boots hit the scaffolding 2 levels below with a bone-jarring thud, but Mara was already moving, slipping into the tangle of pipes and gears before anyone could spot her. Above her, chaos erupted. She heard Hark's enraged bellow, the clatter of enforcers scrambling after her, and the announcer's voice cracking as he tried to regain control of the crowd. What a race, ladies and gentlemen. The grinder wraith, is this possible? It's taking the lead." Mara grinned as she ran, weaving through the labyrinth of ironwork, hands skimming the pipes to steady herself. She knew how this would play out. The enforcers would descend in droves, combing the lower levels for her like hounds scenting blood, but they'd be too late. By the time they sniffed out her trail, she'd be gone, racing the streets on a stolen sky bike, wind whipping her hair, and Hark's precious key nestled in her pocket. Except something was wrong. She skidded to a halt near the southern exhaust vent, her path blocked by 3 men in brass-trimmed coats. Enforcers. Mara cursed under her breath. They were quicker than she'd thought. One of them sneered, raising a thick hand to the comm at his throat. "Got her," he said, voice crackling. "No, you don't," Mara shot back. She pivoted hard, her boots scraping metal as she sprinted for the east side platform. She could hear the enforcers pounding after her, shouting orders she didn't care to hear. If she could just reach the launch chute, there'd be a skybike waiting on the other side. She vaulted a rusted pipe, ducked under a low beam. A hand closed around her wrist like an iron shackle. Mara spun, teeth bared. One of the enforcers loomed over her, a brute with a nose like a sledgehammer. She drove her elbow into his gut, but the bastard barely flinched. "Where do you think you're running, little thief?" he growled, yanking her closer. "Anywhere you're not," Mara snarled. She twisted hard, slipping through his grip as her boot snapped up to connect with his knee. He roared in pain, staggering back, and Mara was off again, lungs burning, the key pressing sharp against her thigh. But the seconds she'd lost cost her. Enforcers were closing in from every angle now, and the roar of the crowd above had shifted, still frenzied, but darker. Something was happening in the skies. The grinder wraith, that pathetic, lagging machine, was still outpacing its rivals, but it wasn't right. Sparks cascaded from its wings as if the dragon were bleeding iron. Steam burst in violent jets, wreathing the pilot in white-hot mist. Mara glimpsed it through a gap in the scaffolding and froze. The grinder wraith wasn't flying. It was falling, straight toward the arena floor, and the pilot wasn't trying to stop it. "He's gonna crash!" someone screamed. The realization hit Mara like a punch to the gut. Whatever engine powered that dragon, whatever reckless, forbidden miracle that pilot had crammed into its frame, was tearing it apart. And when it hit the ground, it wouldn't just scatter steel and fire. It would tear the entire arena apart with it. "Gods save us," she breathed. The enforcers closed in, their batons sparking to life. "Hands up, Vex," one barked. Mara looked at the smoking dragon, at the descending chaos, and back at the men. Her lips curled into a grin. "I think I'll pass." She sprinted toward the edge of the platform, ignoring their shouts. The ground loomed far below, but there was no time for caution. She leapt into open air, arms outstretched, and grabbed the thick rope of a passing cargo lift. The shock of it jolted her bones, but Mara held on, the rope burning against her palms as she slid toward freedom. Above her, the sky rippled with fire and ruin. The grinder wraith screamed its death cry, one final roar of steel and desperation. And then it hit. The explosion came first, a flash of blinding light, bright enough to turn the world to glass. The shockwave followed, tearing through the arena like a hurricane. Mara felt it hit her, felt the cargo lift jolt and sway as heat licked at her heels. But she didn't look back. She swung free of the scaffolding, twisting in the air as the flames churned behind her. Somewhere, far above, the Coal King would be cursing her name. Good. When Mara landed, she was already running, the key clutched in her hand and the smell of fire and freedom in her lungs. Let them chase her. She'd just stolen the means to rule the skies.